Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at an excerpt from an interview between the Final Fantasy XI producer Akihiko Matsui and Naoki Yoshida, who of course we all know from Final Fantasy 14 and 16. There've actually been 3 parts to this interview already, and apparently a 4th part is coming on June 22nd. I chose not to make videos about these initially, but I kind of want to go back and do videos on some of the stuff on this site because there's tons of really interesting details, not just in this interview, but on the rest of the We Are Vana'diel site, basically a giant celebration of the 20th year of Final Fantasy XI service, which just happened this last May. So I'm sitting here thinking about what to do for a video. I saw this and I was like, you know what? Let's do that because the previous 2 interviews were fairly interesting and I've been told there's a 4th one coming, so I might as well read the 3rd one and share it with you all. I'll include a link to the description. The We Are Vana'diel site, like I said, has a ton of stuff, but interested to see what Yoshi-P and Matsui-P, as he is called in the Final Fantasy XI community, have to talk about in this one. So a lot of the other 2 interviews is about maintaining an MMO, coming up with ideas and all sorts of things along those lines. In the previous one, for example, there's an excerpt that really made the rounds in the Final Fantasy 14 community about how they're probably going to have to start coming up with completely original jobs. I mean, they've already been doing that, but Yoshi-P just said it'd be difficult to, keep drawing from Final Fantasy every single time they need a job. So, like I said, we've already seen that to some point, so interested to see if Yoshi-P has any insights in this one in particular. So this year's Final Fantasy XI's 20th anniversary and 9th year since 14 relaunch, just setting things up. And this first section is about maintaining developer motivation in long-term MMO relationships. Is there a secret formula when it comes to that? So Matsui here says it's crucial for developers to be intrinsically motivated in their work. This is something we actually hear Yoshi-P talk about a lot, so it's great to hear Matsui-P also talking about such things. And MMO isn't something you consider finished after developing. You must make a continual commitment to the people playing your game. The more I think about it, the more I agree with Mr. Matsui. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't mean to be rude to our customers, but development of a game is doomed if the developers lose their motivation. And sometimes they stay motivated in ways we can't even remotely understand to do things that are going to be so harshly criticized. So that can really put a dent in that motivation factor. Customers are absolutely right when they say, we're the ones paying. You have to continue development. Believe it, it's an inevitable fact. We also are human. So if someone were to say, I don't care if I'm getting paid, I don't want to work on the game anymore, then that'd be out of our hands. So I know people have often wondered if Final Fantasy XI is ever going to stop getting anything brand new. That would be the thing to do it, would be if the people working on it now decided they didn't want to work on it. Because you have to remember, Final Fantasy XI is developed using PlayStation 2 dev kits to this day. They went and bought up every single unit they could find and just did everything they could to actually get those to be able to make the content that they want. And so if the people who understand those tools were to say, I don't want to do this anymore, it would certainly be a problem for Final Fantasy XI. He is to go about maintaining their motivation to prevent that. Ambitious developers tend to have the desire to compete with the rest of the world by creating state-of-the-art games with cutting-edge technology. Yeah. When it comes to developing MMOs, upgrading the base systems and graphics engines is no easy feat. As professionals, sometimes we can't help but compare our day-to-day work with what's feasible on the latest technology. Oh my god, Yoshi-P, don't read Reddit posts about how Final Fantasy 14 needs a new engine. I mean, I think it'd be really cool. I wouldn't disagree with that notion, but do pretty good with the engine that we're on and the technology we have. So, once the graphic updates come with the little shaders and everything, I think it'll look a lot better. Sounds like a unique burden of developing MMOs has been around for a while. Oh yeah. Why we need a motivator that surpasses those kind of feelings, for example, might be a substantial salary, a work environment that enables you to try out new things, or noticeable improvements in your personal growth. Another one might be fostering an environment where you can receive positive feedback directly from the players. He's just listing off a ton of different ways to keep developers motivated. Nothing too fancy. At the end of the day, I believe aspects of content quality affected by the developer's motivation are conveyed to the people playing the game. Oh, yes, they are. Having recently played through a lot of the newer Final Fantasy XI stuff, while a lot of it is still really held back by the game's age and the engine and the technology it was built on, they do everything they can within reason to try to bring new stuff to that game. You can tell that they're very motivated to do so, especially having played through some of the more recent story quests that they've been adding. So I definitely feel that from Matsui-P. We keep our team invigorated by rotating roles within the development team or Creative Business Unit 3's other titles. So a lot of people have wondered exactly how that works. Now, in a previous interview, Yoshi-P actually said that Final Fantasy XI sometimes has to borrow developers from Final Fantasy XIV. They essentially have to put in a request for a certain number of hours, 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever, and then it has to become available on their schedules, but they allow them to do things like that. So in other words, yes, Final Fantasy 16 probably has drawn some development time from developers working on 14 and quite possibly, I don't know about 11. I don't know how much the 11 devs keep up with the technology the other teams work on. I don't think they've spoken about that, but the idea is there. If they had any other titles they were working on simultaneously, then just to make sure the developers are feeling motivated, they might let them do that, or they might encourage doing that, or they might just do it in the first place so long as the developers are okay with it. Assigning longtime level designers to content planning. And again, it's not even just about you're doing level design in one game, go do level design in another game. They're trying to give them rooms to grow and room to learn how to do more content. I'm going to give you a solid room for growth story that we heard recently, very, very recently from an interview. The person who wrote the Beast Tribe quests for 5.x for Shadowbringers was allowed to write the Aglaya 24-man raid story in Endwalker. Now that's vertical growth, but there's a chance maybe somewhere down the line that instead of writing, he can move to something else. Now that's less likely because writing is something that's very, very time consuming and very unique. It'd be like if it's not like I expect Koji Fox to suddenly go and design a Savage boss, but I'm okay with that if he were to do that. But that's the kind of things you can have. You can have somebody who's working on Blue Mage suddenly be working on Savage, or someone who works on Savage now working on something in the Gold Saucer. We often hear these stories and people say that it's costing them the content that they want, whereas it's more being used for motivation so they don't feel like they're locked down to one thing all the time. It's why Mr. Ozma will probably not be the one doing the next Ultimates, because he's probably not going to want that pressure. He's not going to feel motivated to put in the amount of work that goes into an Ultimate every time, when they can rotate and foster other developers into that role to give them the experience that they need. So just a fun little tidbit into how they actually encourage. Like any other form of entertainment, games come to an end when the providing party loses interest. I believe it's valuable that our division offers those kind of initiatives. Working on the same project for 20 years must require an enormous amount of commitment. Yeah. There are people who have put their career plan on hold until 11 celebrates his 20th anniversary and finds a clear trajectory forward, which I truly admire. Given their careers as game developers, it's a highly critical decision. Perhaps their choice is something I could keep to myself, but at the same time, I feel that it wouldn't hurt for more people to know that there are members who have made that sort of commitment to work on 11. So that's interesting. There are people who put their career plan on hold until 11 celebrates its 20th anniversary. 11 has now celebrated its 20th anniversary. So the thing we were talking about earlier with the potential for some of the 11 devs to leave, they're not saying that here. They're not saying they are going to leave, but at the very least, they were committed to getting to that 20th anniversary. And then it was like, well, we'll see where we go from there. So it's on the table at the very least that the devs are not, they're committed, and they have been super committed, but it may not be a permanent thing for all of them. I'm curious to see how this ends up working out in the future. But no, the 11 devs aren't quitting. That's not what's happening. Let's be very clear. That is not what's happening in this interview. It's also Yoshi-P the one saying that. He's in charge of Business Division 3's resources, so I guess he'd be quite knowledgeable on that. As for how you interact with your player community, do you feel that's changed over the course of long-term operations? I can tell you right now that it has, especially looking at 11. Nowadays, there are systems in place which allow the development team to listen to player feedback. On the other hand, back in the early days, we saw the mindset when we were making conventional console games, which was to capitalize on developers' uniqueness and only think about the players who would find that sort of game interesting. In that sense, our mindset during the early days may have been unfit for creating MMOs. I mean, that mentality got you, Final Fantasy 11. So I guess you can't say it would be unfit for creating MMOs. Maybe unfit for maintaining a massively popular MMO in the current landscape. That would have significantly hurt you. It'd be like if the New World devs just said, no, that's what we're doing. We don't care. Not quite to that extreme, but you know what I mean. And I definitely feel that. I mean, Square Enix in its roughest years was all about trying to be unique and taking risks and not paying off, as many of us very, very well remember. And so it's good to see that it was not just in the actual work that they were producing, but also in communications where they had to kind of redirect that. So we see that they do take feedback into account far more nowadays than they used to. Also, this has been not centered the whole video, and it's driving me crazy. I was in such a rush to record it, I didn't fix it. It sounds like you really had to learn as you went during the early days. I can tell you also, from just a consumer standpoint, you can tell that they had to. Rather than just simply creating what the customers want. Yeah. The important idea is to make a game you personally enjoy rather than just simply creating what the customers want. Yeah, you have to want to make what you're making. So yeah, while you could take feedback, it still has to be somewhat within reason. I don't mean that we ignore the players, but we do try to reconcile those opinions with the development team's ideas. After all, if we didn't do that, it wouldn't really matter who's making the game. That's true. However, Final Fantasy 11 players are very kind. We have met, I've met a ton of lovely Final Fantasy 11 players, really great people. Do not go into shout chat in Asura. Don't do that. Developers, please, I beg you, don't go there. It's just, please, it's keep this opinion and just don't go there. Okay, that's all I'm asking. Okay. And there are many who also believe both sides need to work together and liven things up. In that sense, I'm very grateful to our customers and thankful for their continued support. No problem. I still keep, even when I don't play, I still keep my 11 sub going, you know, in case I ever want to log in for like a story update or to make a video or something, but I just can't play long term anymore. So you get my money for how much of my life you stole from me as a kid, but you know, they only get me to occasionally log in. The secret to long-term operations is to communicate with the players. Yeah, I mean, having Yoshi-P on this interview, no one's really surprised by that outlook. I even bring it up right at the beginning. Letter from the producer live when they relaunched 14 made a significant difference, in the distance between the players and developers. That was weird. Would you say the same distance between players and developers changed in 11? Oh, yeah. From the day of, hey, this boss is dumb, how do we do it, to releasing a 2.5 minute, hey, the weather changed and the day changed. That sure is interesting, right? That was the most communication we got back in the day. I'd say it happens different times for overall development team. And for me personally, from the team's point of view, I'd say the first fan event, I keep forgetting, Final Fantasy 11 did have like live fan fest-esque events. I had never been to them. I didn't even know about them when I was playing because, you know, I was a kid in high school, so... becoming more aware of the humans on the other side of the screen was a turning point for us. For me personally, it was when I was harshly criticized by the players regarding job adjustments. Which ones? Because I'm sure you got that all the time. Maybe it was just every single time it happened. Let's take their claims with a grain of salt. There's no denying their points were marked to have some truth in them in terms of our shortcomings. Becoming aware of that, I feel I should be more proactive, and listening to their opinions was a turning point for me. So there wasn't really a moment of dramatic change. It's more accurate to say we gradually became more in tune with things during these past 20 years. Not to mention my gratitude towards the players who've been playing the game for so long has only continued to grow. With a reason. That's a lot of time to commit, both as a developer and as a consumer. Relationship of mutual trust that's been built up over the years. Nowadays, with the large number of long-term games, including mobile games, don't tell them about Diablo Immortal. There's kind of like a guideline for how companies should interact with their customers. Definitely don't tell them about Diablo Immortal. But there wasn't anything like that when we launched 11, so we kind of accumulated experience over a long time. Yeah, that makes sense. As for 14, the letter from the producer live have been a thing ever since Mr. Yoshida first took over. Was there a particular level of closeness you had in mind? I always believed there needed to be more communication between players and MMOs. We've kind of heard this story from Yoshi-P before. He gets asked about why he started live letters and a bunch of other interviews over the years. Let's see, it was, as a longtime MMO player, it was my conclusion after noticing how many players saw the developers as their enemies. Yeah, those early MMOs, definitely the case. I mean, it still happens to this day, but more often it's because of like a drastic misunderstanding. And I think that's why Yoshi-P puts himself in kind of the crosshairs whenever 14 makes a mistake. He's said before he wants his developers to focus on developing and let him be the one who takes the brunt of the public backlash, so that way they can focus on the more important things. So yeah, I can see why he does that, given the way that he interprets or remembers his experience back in the day. Let's see. Let's see, because I was both a player and a game developer, I could see why developers made certain implementations and understood the difficult decisions they were forced to make, but their intentions weren't reaching the player communities at large. Of course, there was no way these intentions would have ever reached a player because developers weren't publicizing them. Yeah, absolutely. Even just with a few years of college and game development under my belt and just being a hobbyist of the game, of just the video game industry my entire life, you often, if you watch my videos, you'll know that I often do kind of look at the ups and downs of every decision and wonder what the right one actually is, because I'm not the one who has to make those decisions. I don't want to be the one that has to make those decisions, because they are not fun. They are not fun at all. I see what some of y'all saying on the internet. That can't be fun to deal with. Hell, you say it to me too. I don't even know what to do half the time. Well, normally you wouldn't really consider those sort of things. 20 years ago, maybe not, but nowadays, yeah, a little bit more. Back then, MMO operations were unaware of how important it was to explain their intentions. So at the receiving end of these decisions, players became increasingly frustrated from not understanding the reason behind them. Eventually, they would grow to think of the developers as their enemies. Since the developers are only human too, when they were confronted with negative reactions, they grew angry, thinking like, I only have the best intentions. What did I do to deserve this? Matsui's like, yeah, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Why do we end up with this? Why do we end up with this friction when both sides want an enjoyable game? The reason is solely because the direction developers have in mind for their game isn't reaching the players. Not understanding the reasoning behind implementations, that's part of it, but sometimes it's not agreeing with the direction people, the developers want to take. Like, I remember when they announced they were doing less dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV, you know, people who I associate with, we often don't really care because we're like, we're not trying to spam dungeons. We don't look forward to having a ton of dungeons. Like, yeah, they're cool to run once, but after that, There are people who are very, very deeply offended by that, regardless of the fact that the reason was pretty sound. It was resources for a type of content that didn't make sense to do so many of when they all functioned essentially the same. Yeah, it had a little bit of world building in it, but if they really wanted to, they could always do that somewhere down the line anyway. So that's, you know, that's sometimes it's not just the understanding, it is what is actually being done. Especially true with game systems like Final Fantasy XI's, where players spend a lot of time leveling up. So I thought that if I ever had a chance to lead an MMORPG, I'd frequently communicate with the players and share our intentions or future plans of the game. And that opportunity arose in A Realm Reborn. Wasn't suddenly expecting to appear. He felt that the major negativity surrounding 1.0 called for no less than the person in charge to appear, so we decided on that approach. Matsui-P, Mr. Wada, also appeared on the first letter from the producer live. That is the CEO of Square Enix at the time, no longer the CEO. Yoshida, under normal circumstances, rather than have me appear, I thought it'd be better to have someone who could talk about the overall project, like a lead developer manager, have them make announcements. That would be similar to what Dark Age of Camelot did. Sonya, their PR manager, would gather questions from the players to bring up in their interviews. Interesting. So I didn't follow the development or anything of Dark Age of Camelot at all. I've always known about it, but it's never been a game that I've actually played. You know, I spent most of my years in Final Fantasy XI and WoW, and then Final Fantasy XIV. So yeah, this is just a background on Dark Age of Camelot, in case you didn't know. It was a column called Grab Bag, and even if there were times when we'd be thinking, that's not what we wanted to know, oh man, that happens with live letters all the time. Now I definitely see the parallels. It made me very happy. No, I'm happy. Everyone would be making lighthearted remarks like, someone do something about that, Sonya, but we all looked forward to that column on Fridays. There weren't many Japanese players who read it because it was only in English, but those of us like me, who kept up with the information on the game, would explain to others they actually talked about that in Grab Bag. This is what they said. Yeah, I feel that. That sounds like me every time someone asks me what happened in the latest live letter. Oh man, if I had a nickel for every time I had to say anything like that. So that furthered the mutual understanding. That's right, Dark Age of Camelot's mid-service efforts to bring their team and players closer together left an impression on me, and I felt it could be even more fun if we did it on a larger scale. Yeah, fair. Thanks, Dark Age of Camelot. Wasn't it resource intensive to prepare the materials? Check with the development team to confirm what features and concepts we have. He's talked about this before. All the information is compiled into a document. The community team goes through it and narrows it down to topics we should publicize, and that's an extremely taxing process. Compared to that, considering we don't use a script for the letter live broadcast, you say it's easier for us actually doing the show. Isn't it always? Isn't it always? It's always the people's behind the scenes that make it happen every single time. We do spend more resources on following up each category after a patch is released. In a way, you could say that we're spending those resources preemptively. Besides, explaining beforehand gives the players something to be excited about. So there's more pros than cons. I agree there's a lot of time it's better to explain first before the players develop their own misconceptions. Explaining first doesn't, let me explain. Explaining it first does not stop the misconceptions. It gives them a basis for their misconceptions. Or even if it's not a misconception, it's a bit of speculation that has no real backing outside of words because we don't have information. A lot of people are doing that right now with Island Sanctuary in Final Fantasy XIV. I think it's going to be a replacement for housing. That has never been established. It's been established you can place down buildings. It's a slice of lifestyle of content. Minions can walk around. We really don't know much else about it yet, so we have to wait for the next letter from the producer live. This statement is going to apply so much to people if Island Sanctuary isn't exactly what they think it is. But having too much exposure is also an issue. Recently, there's been more cases where excerpts of our broadcasts and interviews have spread on social media. There's also been a considerable increase in our words being taken out of context for clickbait, so it's rough. Listen, Yoshi-P, it's part of the game, okay? I don't feel like I do it that much. Occasionally, you need like a headline, you know, like Blue Mage PvP. He mentions it. It's not in the thing. It's a topic that comes up. That's how the game works, Yoshi-P. We just need headlines. As long they gotta click, and then they can hear the explanation or your words. I'm gonna move on. Anyway, I'm always impressed at how Mr. Yoshida speaks to avoid misunderstandings, how he always includes the reasoning and background information. I actually do appreciate that. I do really reach for that anytime I've had the chance to talk to Yoshi-P. I guess that's all for naught if people are removing the context. Yup. Remember the third-party add-on thing? People have already fucking forgotten because just like everyone said, it was only going to matter for a week and then everyone was going to move on. Yeah, everyone just took excerpts of that out of context when it had a warning that said not to take excerpts out of context. Yeah, it's always going to happen that way. That's the internet. It's not like I'll reduce how much I communicate because of that, but I do make sure to speak up when there's something that's made me unhappy, like when I talked about how criticism and abuse are different things. Fair. Ability to spread information in the age of social media can sometimes be a double-edged sword. Sometimes! It is always a double-edged sword. It's just a matter of which side of the sword you're balancing on. I believe that's precisely why communication is so important. However, I'd also like to follow up that with a warning for my fellow game developers. I don't think you should try to mimic a broadcast half-heartedly without a goal, unless you're going for something more like a variety show. Customers play games more than we do, so trying to run a broadcast based on superficial knowledge is bound to fail. I often get consulted by others in the industry, but our first question to them is, do you play games? What a question. Do you play games? I love the idea of somebody coming to Yoshi-P for advice, and he's like, do you play games? Oh, man. Mr. Matsui's freshly picked Vanadil broadcasts come a long-standing series as well, since they started about a year after Yoshida began his letter from the... They've been around that long? I didn't remember that. Whoa. Started freshly picked Vanadil so I could relay what I wanted in a quicker manner. Going through the professional-looking broadcast would require a lot of preparation, end up delaying my message from its intended timing. So we embrace the cheapness and prioritize delivering information. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what this video is about. There's no editing. There's no green screen. The blue lines are back there. The whole frame was uneven. I'm just getting the information. See, I respect that man right there. He understands what it's all about. Now that we're seeing the positive effects of the broadcast, I can even have PowerPoint slides made for me. I ain't going to do PowerPoint slides unless somebody... I ain't doing that. Broadcasting those in a studio nowadays, we started off in a conference room. Yeah. With Final Fantasy 14, we still try to avoid using the studio as much as we can. Our broadcasts often ended up being long, so using the studio would mean we make the studio staff stay behind. Makes me feel guilty when I must ask them for an extension. So we don't use the studio outside of special circumstances. Yeah, that stage they got looks real nice. When they do occasionally use it. And that's it for part 3. So yeah, I was told part 4, there is going to be a part 4, and it says here at the bottom, part 4 will be available on June 22nd. The 20th anniversary was in the middle of May, and this released at this is like a 4-week interview. Oh, that's June 22nd. It's the 8th right now. Why are these 2 weeks apart? There's so many of them. But anyway, that's it for part 3 of the interview between Yoshi-P and Matsui-P of Final Fantasy XI. Like I said, the We Are Vanadil site has tons of other stuff. Maybe we should do a fun little look. There's one section that I think could be hilarious to look at. I'll pull it up here for a little bit of a teaser. History. I think this is the section. Yeah, we remember. Yeah, this is like the timeline of Final Fantasy XI's development and significant events. Oh, this is the PlayStation 2's the console's launch. I thought it was talking about the PlayStation 2. Excuse me, I'm in the middle of recording video. See? It's just cheapness. Embrace it. Yeah, but some of this stuff is really interesting to read. Yeah, so maybe we could go through some of this stuff for fun and some of the other stuff on the We Remember Vanadil site, which I'll include a link to in the description. But anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview. We'll touch up on part 4 on June 22nd. And until then, please keep an eye out. I was actually going to release a Final Fantasy XI video about a week and a half ago. I spent about a week on it, and it was supposed to be a compiled story of the latest expansions, really the latest story quests that they've been doing, the Voracious Resurgence. But we found out it's getting another chapter this month, and it'll probably be wrapping up in the next few months at that. So I decided I'd wait till chapter 8 was done and then produce the video from chapters 1 through 8, and then we'll see how much longer it goes. Then I can produce a finished video on it for anyone who hasn't played 11 and is curious what the new story involves. I'll tell you what, I didn't see that villain coming, and I really should have, but that's all I'll say. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see all of you in the next one, and until then, take care.